Simon.
Hello.
Hey, Simon.
Hello.
Hey, Simon, it's Skylar.
Simon?
How
Hey,
you doing?
Simon.
Hello, Simon.
What's up, Simon?
Hello.
How you doing?
Hey,
Hello.
Hello.
Simon.
Hello, Simon.
Hello, Simon.
Hi, my name is Simon Brooks, and I am the host of Conversations with Storytellers. Welcome back to a new season of wisdom, folk and fairy tales from our elders, a meeting with professional storytellers. Each share their thoughts on our profession and gems of wisdom. Welcome to the podcast. I'm really glad you're here. The first guest of the season is Diane Edgecomb. Diane Edgecomb was one of the first people I saw to make a big impression on me on the professional circuit. Part of it was to do with the workshop I took at the same conference, and the detailed depth and compassion she has came out in her work on stage and with workshop participants. Although we've known each other for a long time, we have skirted about each other. Not intentionally, just never had the time to sit down together for more than 5 minutes. I have a lot of respect for Diane and her ethos and ethics. I have never had a conversation with her that did not make me think or get me more excited about our craft. So to spend an hour with her in her home, thanks Tom for letting me hang out with Diane for a morning, was wonderful. Please enjoy the thoughts and wisdom of Diane Edgecomb. So thanks for doing this for me. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for traveling down.
No, well, I'd rather do a face-to-face than over the phone because the quality is so much better.
Oh, is that why?
It's also more personable.
It is much more personal. Well, look, starting right there, the face-to-face is really part of what it's about with storytelling.
Yeah.
In my opinion.
Yeah, it is.
It is about the present moment. It's about being in the presence of. So right there, you have said the right thing.
Good. I don't want to be upbraided before we get started. That would be a bad thing. So, you've done a lot, and you've been doing this. When did you start doing storytelling for a living?
For a living, I was thinking 1890, and I'm like, oh, that can't be right. It was like 1989, 1990.
Okay.
That I jumped the ship. Before I started storytelling and making my living that way, you have to have like a concurrent job that's giving you the time and the space to do the artistic work and the business work to get something moving. Right. It's almost like having two snowshoes on your feet. You gotta keep the one that's already bringing in the money, and then gradually you can just go.
Especially if you're married to another artist.
Oh yes, we have a lot of backlog of money. Yep.
So you were in drama before you came into storytelling.
Exactly. Yes, I didn't know there was storytelling, and I'm happy that I spent, my childhood and my early adulthood and my college years, a couple of them before I decided I didn't need college, in theater. I'm really happy because it is also still, it's a sister form. And there was a rigor and a training that they had vocally and physically that hasn't yet arrived in storytelling. So I had a lot of very basic training in the imagination and in the expressive arts and the fluidity of the voice, the fluidity of the body that has just served me in when I fell in love with storytelling.
So you do a lot of really good voices, I think, way better than mine.
Yeah, but I don't have the authentic accent.
Well, that's got nothing to do with it. That's just the look of the Irish, as they say.
Oh.
But so when you did theatre work, did you also do like voiceover work and things like that at one point?
I did kind of look into that, but it wasn't really calling me. You're advertising when you're doing voiceover work, or you're narrating for something. But that work is, as you know, it's all farmed out now to people who are names, pretty much.
Yeah.
No, and I think that I have a flexible voice. I have a malleable voice. I always had. In my it was really my early training. I was in children's theater, and my first role was as the gray man in Dumpling and the Golden Goose. That was my first role, as an old gray man. So you could say that was a stretch. You know, I was about 10 years old. And so they gave me, I played Akka the Goblin in Snow Queen and the Goblin. I mean, they gave me the great roles, and I did play the female clothespin in Pinot and Pinette, which was more of a straight role with long blonde hair, and I got to run screaming down the aisle, chased by a black widow spider. So it really, and I always never felt like male, female, that like I had to be the ingenue, or the straight person. It immediately opened me up to character. And so that started me right off, as people should be started off, when their imagination is still really kicking and you're not like afraid of what other people are going to think about you so much, with this range and with these great roles. Akka the Goblin in the Snow Queen and the Goblin. Yeah. I start out encapsulated in an ice block, with dry ice all foaming around me, and then I jump out. It was, it was great.
Yeah, if that doesn't get you started, I don't know what will.
Everything's downhill from there.
But that dry ice back in those days, it was nasty stuff.
I don't remember really. No, it was also cool. You just, you had to sit inside this. Well, I was inside of a box, that had clear sides. So it wasn't like I was sitting in the dry ice. But I don't remember the taste of it. Maybe you had it different in the UK.
You maybe do. Maybe we have a cheaper brand because we're a rock and roll band that weren't doing so well.
I think so.
Maybe.
Yeah,
maybe
yours was touched with formaldehyde.
Yes. Which is why I preserved my good looks.
Exactly. I bet I could have used that. So anyway, the vocally, I do think that from the beginning I was stretched. Although I do think people have different abilities with their voices. They have different fortes with their voices, and also there are certain limitations that you want to try to push against. Some of them are not necessary. Some can just be habitual or patterning, and in that case you really want to try to break out of that.
Right. I find myself sometimes falling into that. Like, I need to find new characters for these stories because some of them are being repurposed. Yes, they are.
Well, that happens. I mean, think of what we're asked to do.
Right.
How many characters, and of course, you've got a certain landing place that is solid. And I never separate the voice and the body. The voices, I never look at them as voices. I look at them as characters, because the body, I can't do some of my voices if I don't have the body configuration. I simply can't do it. I will hurt my voice or it won't come out. So it has to be part of the energy of that. But I know what you're saying about how do we really find this unique character and this unique living voice that yet can switch immediately to another one in a moment. And it takes... they are all a little bit different. In a way, we have to be a master of illusion and deception, because it's impossible almost what's asked of a storyteller, but in a way, we have to be completely authentic.
Right, we do.
Absolutely authentic.
Yeah, because it doesn't work if you're not.
Yeah. But at the same time, you can say, well, this character can talk faster. And that's why I mean, like, illusion or skill or craft or a little bit of delusion. You can try to make a construct that kind of, because the audience needs to know immediately that it's someone different.
Right.
So you can choose something that's kind of like a big, broad thing like that and just make a decision. And if it works, fine. But of course, yes, it has to be grounded. But so
yeah. Did you do character voices when you were a kid growing up? I mean, outside of being plays?
No.
You didn't like mimic, Speed Buggy or anything like that?
No, I don't remember doing that. I don't remember. No, I really don't remember. I mean, the time that I did voices was for the theater. I mean, if I was doing a character.
Right.
Yeah. No, I didn't do a lot of mimicking. I mean, although I think mimicry is the fundamental thing. You hear it and you try to imitate it. I think that's one of the fundamental, things that it is easy in a way, but you really do have to mimic.
You have to listen.
Mimic, yeah. You have to listen, you have to mimic. I at one point wanted to write this story called Mimesis or something like that about this idea that this was this transformative character that could like kind of, be like all characters would through being like them.
Oh, wow.
Didn't happen.
You didn't?
No, it didn't happen.
How many of these projects do we have
we
in
don't
the back
even
drawer?
we don't want to know.
That's true. So when you grew up, were there storytellers in your family, or was there drama in your family? I mean, when I say drama, I mean acting.
Yes, there was drama. Well, yeah, and I didn't realize it until I became a storyteller. I didn't really realize what I had been seeing because I didn't know it was possible or what it was.
Because it was normal.
Yeah, it was normal. It was part of my father's family. They were in Maine. They'd been, from the 1600s. So they were, living on family land. They would gather around the kitchen table at my uncle's every evening. When, I was living in Connecticut when we visited. And my Uncle Roy, I mean, he was a big guy. And he just, the minute he was going to start a story, it was always the same. He just taking a breath and he just kind of leaned back in his chair and he'd go, well, well, I remember. And then it would just be going off, and he was so good, and it was crazy stuff, like with the horses and with the pranks that he would play and hitting people in the head with stones, and then tragic stories from our family that he had learned from his mother, our grandmother, because he was the kid who was the youngest and stayed in the kitchen.
Ah.
The kid who stays in the kitchen and helps their mom prepare the meals hears the stories. And he was the one.
Yeah, Angela Klingler said the same thing. She was always hanging out with her grandmother.
Yeah.
And there were stories a story that she shared at her grandmother's funeral that she thought everybody in the family knew. And she was the only one that knew it because she was the one that hung out in the kitchen with her grandmother.
The kitchen.
Yeah.
And she would tell him all the family story, and I recorded him. But it was also because of the influence of storytelling that I realized, oh my God, I do come from a tradition. My dad also told stories. We'd sit on his lap, we were kids, and he'd tell us, my sister and I, stories about being in World War II because he was in the World War he was in the World War for the whole time that it existed, but he had gone to enlist for 4 years to get money for college, and then just when he was supposed to be released, he was on the Enterprise, the aircraft carrier, and they were heading towards Hawaii, towards Pearl Harbor.
Ooh.
And they were late. And so because they were late leaving California to go to Pearl Harbor, as they approached Pearl Harbor, the entire fleet was burning.
Oh my God.
And he told us that story. And we were just young girls, just sitting on his lap. I mean, we were that young. And he said to us, I don't even know why he said the most amazing thing he said is there were hundreds of men out on the deck. He said the most amazing thing was that nobody said a word. And that's because it was one of those moments in time where the enormity of an outside situation is so overwhelming that time just stops and everything just stops, and you know that the world is going to change.
Wow.
So, I mean, he had troubles because he worked in the engine room, and for the next 6 years they were in the war. They were called the Gray Ghost, the Enterprise.
Oh.
So the Japanese had thought that they had eliminated the entire fleet, but they had not eliminated the Enterprise. So it was called the Gray Ghost after that because it got out, and then it just became, never went back into port. Just for the beginning part, it just was our only ship, and he was signed up immediately, but then it was 6 years in the engine room, which was very stressful.
Yeah.
And when he got out, when he went up to my aunt's up in Maine, not the wife of my Uncle Roy, but his sister, his soft-voiced sister, she said he would sleep on their couch with one foot on the floor because he was ready to jump up in a minute's notice, and his nerves were really gone. If something happened, he wouldn't ask you. He was just immediately, his blood pressure was through the roof. Anything like, when I said I swallowed a fish bone, I suppose that's not nothing.
Right.
But it was
for him
really,
it was.
But for him, it was just like, what, and I'm just like pointing at my mouth and waving my hands and and then they took me to the hospital and they gave me barium just to swallow, and I could feel the fish bone go down.
Oh.
And then they told me that that I never had a fish bone. And that's when I learned to distrust medical science.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. So were there any other family storytellers other than your dad and your uncle? What about on your mum's side? Were there storytellers there?
Well, they were just very funny people.
Yeah.
They were just wacky. And my father was from the country. It was like country mouse and city mouse. And my mom was from the city, from Bangor, Maine. And they had all these...
Bangor, Maine's a city.
Well, if you'd seen my dad's farm and known about them doing logging and all the different things they did, you would say that it was the city. And so she would always have these weird, she would laugh, ha ha ha, and she'd say things like, "Oh, you're running around like a fart in a mitten." I was like, okay, she had all these colorful, funny sayings that I think she got from my grandfather. They just had a lot of fun, but she didn't really tell stories.
Right.
No.
They just had a good sense of humor.
She had a great sense of humor. Yeah.
My mum used to say like a fart in a colander. You run around like a fart in a
I'll see your mitten and you can raise your I think a colander's good. Maybe it got like telephone. It got lost in the translation because my people, my mom's side was like Scotch and then Scotch Irish, and my dad's side was more like English and Welsh and British Isles general.
Now, is there any Native American?
No, my grandfather always told us there was, but apparently there was not. I think he was thinking that because he was very tall and he was a little bit, but no, there's none.
Okay.
No, I just have fallen in love with everything about Native culture and the Native people and this land because we are on this land.
Yeah.
And I was very lucky that my father had been grown up in the landscape because he would take me out and he would show me what I could eat.
Oh, so you were raised not as a forager, but you knew the foraging skills.
Yeah, well, we just pick it up and we just eat it. So I wasn't afraid, and I really wasn't afraid of germs or bugs or this or that. But he would just show me, different things to eat, and we just go
But
out.
you didn't wear a crash helmet on your bike either.
No, we didn't. No.
Nobody did.
No.
So are there any stories that you remember from your childhood?
Well, I think just the usual. I mean, I was fascinated by Peter Pan, of course. I mean, this is... And I never felt, as I was saying, that I was a girl and I couldn't do this and I couldn't do that. So this is kind of a character that is not really masculine and not really feminine and can do whatever they want and could fly.
Yeah.
Was like totally fascinating to me. And so I would try to think, how can I fly? And so I tried. I would put on my blue, and I was fascinated with Mighty Mouse too.
Mm-hmm.
He was like really buff, and little, but he was really buff, and he'd go, "Here I come to save the day," that. Yeah. So I would put on my blue sweater and tie it around my neck, and I would run down the hill at my elementary school, and then I'd jump off and try to fly. It didn't work. But then dandelions have that puff on them. And I somehow got the idea that if I blew off the puff of the dandelion, it was flying through the air. And if I ran and if I caught it in my mouth and kept running, I would be able to fly. So I spent a lot of time doing that. And it was hard for my father because that means there's more dandelions.
Yeah.
I kept trying to say, practical. Why don't you pick up them and put them in the something or other, to try, but no, I wanted to fly.
Yeah.
I thought that Mighty Mouse, I would like look out our window in our bedroom, my sister's in my bedroom, out to the pasture, which was near us, and I would imagine that Mighty Mouse would fly in and he would land on the windowsill. She'd be like, "What are you doing?" I said, "Nothing." But I was waiting for my love.
Oh, wow. That's fun. Yeah, did you ever have dandelions growing out of your ears from eating all those seeds?
I did not. No, I didn't have them growing in my stomach either. No.
Well, that's a good thing.
Yeah.
So, how did you switch over from like going back to the drama and the theatre? How did you switch over? What did you see or what did you hear that made you think, "Oh, that's storytelling. I like that."
Yeah, I mean, it was just because the revolution was going on, the revival was going on, which I heard about peripherally. I mean, I was in the theater circuit, so I'd known when Jay did Village Heroes. I had even seen it, but it didn't really enter my mind, oh, he's doing storytelling. I didn't even think about that, or, oh, wouldn't it be fun to be all the characters? I just knew
you just
that...
saw that as a performance piece.
Yeah, it was a performance. At the theater, I was still looking at myself as an actress or actor that wanted to do things. So, but I was in a children's theater, and there were two things that happened in that children's theater, and one was that we were doing a bunch of folk tales. And so we would travel to the different schools and do this collection of folk tales that was directed by someone called George Capaccio.
Okay.
And when the folk tales were happening, the kids in the audience, they became so absorbed. They were just, the stillness. We know what it is. You're involved in the narrative, completely involved. And I had not seen that before. And I was like, what is that?
What is this magic?
What is this magic? And George Capaccio, who was directing, was also working as a storyteller on the side. And I was like, what's that? And I never saw him do his storytelling, but I thought, well, what? So you tell a story. And I wanted at that point to explore nature and animal characters because of theater work that I had done with someone from the Polish Theater Lab that had us working with animal characters. And I thought, well, if I do storytelling, I can explore animal characters. I don't have to wait.
So you've been into this whole ecological thing for a long time then?
Well, I have anyway. I've always had the nature love, but to find a way to actually have it manifest in my creative work has been a big search for me, because regular theater, well, the chances that you're going to have something that's going to really ask you to intuit nature and plumb the depths of the human nature relationship, and of course we are part of nature, but still we've got this feeling of otherness. So there I was involved with a theater director. In fact, that huge bunch of papers on that table out there is the chapters of the book that I'm writing on this workshop that I took with him. But we did animal characters. And I'd done that before in theater, but it was nothing like that. He was so serious, and we really went into the characterizations in such a way that we were really embodying them in a very deep way, not a superficial way. It's very easy to do a superficial representation to an animal because they are so different. But to actually really embody them was very profound, and he was using it as an exploration of theater. So I worked with the story Monkey and Shark, which is ridiculous because it's a crazy, stupid story that I'm embodying a shark because it's mental. The monkey is like a human character, obviously. But I also worked with the Native American story Jumping Mouse, which Heimnachot Storm has in his Seven Arrows book. And later, once I knew what I was supposed to do, gave me permission to tell it. But I fell in love with that story, and it was a way to really...
Yeah, I fell in love with that story too. I think I was probably 18, 20 when I first came across that, and it was just like, what is this?
That is one of the most profound stories that there is, and it arrived perfectly, as some of the native stories have done, as some of Joe Bruchek's stories have arrived perfectly. It's like, you be careful, you decide, don't really mess with them. Try to realize them, but don't really mess with them. And that's what I realized when it just falls out of your mouth. It falls out of your being, and tinkering with it looks like that.
Yeah.
To be jumping topics, but it's related to what I was just saying. I was at the Scottish International Storytelling Festival, which is very traditional tale oriented. And I think I got there because of the Kurdish, my project gathering the Kurdish stories, because they really want the gathering of the stories. But for an olio, I told the story Three Green Ladies. It's collected by Ruth Tongue, Forgotten Folktales of the English Counties. And that's a story that arrived very, 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 very fully. Exactly. It's just, you don't want to mess with it. It's the language is oral.
Yeah.
It's strong. It's just compelling. It will arrive if you don't mess with it. So I told that story there, and it was very interesting because some of the people who were working there had or tellers there or around it had a very different idea that you really needed to adapt a story or you weren't really doing anything. And I think that's stories retelling is very important, but there are some that are really perfect. And so it was very funny. I was having a conversation with this person, and I was talking to him about the story was so perfect. I really didn't do anything. If I did anything, it was very, very, very light. And he was telling me that I really was not doing that. That's really not storytelling, and I hadn't really done anything. He said, for instance, at this one moment in the story, I've added in this detail where the younger brother looks up at the middle brother and says, remember what day it is. I said, oh, darn. I said, I forgot to put that in. It's in the actual original.
Right.
So he had even completely forgotten what was in the original text, but it was just this crazy moment. But I think what I'm trying to say is that adaptation is really, it's a delicate art. It's like it can be a weave or it can be an operation. You have to be.
Yeah, I would agree
delicate.
with that. There's two stories that I can think of that I've changed. One of them is the Three Feathers, because in the original story, the boy, no, it's not. It's the boy who can change himself into a falcon, an ant, and a lion. And the boy comes up to these creatures that are fighting over this dead horse. And they say, we can't decide which bits we're going to eat. And the boy says, well, the ant should eat the inside because it can get into all the nooks and crannies. The lion, being the biggest, should have all the choice pieces of meat. And then the hawk should get the delicate pieces like the liver and the kidney and stuff like that. And they said, oh, that's brilliant. Why didn't we think of that? We will give you the ability to shapeshift. And I was like, that's really lame. And so I decided that I would adapt it, and this old man was being attacked by these three creatures, so that when the old man gives the boy the gift of being able to shapeshift, the boy's actually earned it, right? And it's not just
because he had the knowledge, but also because he did something.
He made a sacrifice. He had to make a sacrifice. He had to make that decision to put himself at risk to gain that, which makes it a more powerful story. Yeah. Well, those are also plot elements. Yeah, and even beyond plot elements, because we're breathing life into it and we're doing it for a modern audience. There's also, how does the moment happen? So sometimes we're just embroidering on stuff, right? Endlessly. Yes. And with folktales, as you know, you cut to the chase, you keep it clean. But I can, you know the change you made. Right. You worked with the change you made, and you felt it emotionally. Yes. When you went in and you were experiencing that moment, you felt something missing. I did. So, and think about it, if you look at all the different versions, that's how changes got made in different ways over time, because when it enters the storyteller and their feelings, it's like the river isn't going quite that way. Right. Yeah, which is why, there's a favourite storyteller of mine whose name shall not be mentioned, but they very much focus on the traditional straight telling of the story. to honour that story. My feeling is that, but you don't know the original version of that story, because the version that was written down in the 16, 15, 13, 1200s is not the same version that was told in the 5, 6, 700s.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and because we do, we change the story because our culture changes, our technology changes. Even back then, our technology was changing. You know, and so we adapt the stories to fit the new technology that we're living in. Right. Anyway.
No, I think it's very important to remember that when printing came, which is what you're talking about, when printing came, things got fixed.
Right.
And I ran into a lot of that with different mythology pieces. For instance, the mistletoe legend of the mistletoe or Balder story, that it is fixed in this mythic form, but also there were folkloric aspects of the story that continued on with the usage of the mistletoe. So a lot of times something will be fixed as a myth and the folktale will continue to devolve in some cases, or actually show what may have been in the original in some other cases. Like when I worked with Deirdre of the Sorrows, I had to make a big decision. Am I going to go for the Toyne? Am I going to go for this version that is so raw and so powerful, or am I going to work with the folkloric version, which has a happy little trees growing out of their graves at the end? And, you know, I went for the Toyne, but it was a conscious choice after looking at, you know, what was going on.
Yeah. Do you want to talk about Deirdre?
Sure, we could talk about Deirdre.
Tell us about Deirdre.
Deirdre. Oh, my God.
And then we'll talk about Gawain, which is completely different.
Completely different, yeah. I mean, these are two big stories that evolved over a long time. And actually, Tom, my husband, who was in here, had a big influence on helping me to understand how to work with music, for sure. And, you know, also just kind of be in the real scenes of the story. I mean, J. O'Callaghan talks a lot about scenes, sometimes saying, I create scenes. And Tom writes for the musical theater. So sometimes a storyteller will have a problem, just go on describing. But you know that the great storytellers like Shakespeare, boom, you open up Hamlet and they're waiting for a ghost.
Right.
Okay. So with Deirdre...
Can I backpedal a bit? When you say that these pieces are long in the making, you're talking about how you made your versions of these stories, right?
Yes.
Right. Okay. Sorry.
Yeah. My retelling of these stories took place over years, and in fact, Gowan, or New Age Gowan, I call it, just had another little leap when I did it down, because I've been working on how to make that. You want, with your stories, you want the story to arrive.
Yes.
And you can feel it as a teller. It's like it's not quite there yet. You know, I mean, it works, but... So Gowan took a big step forward just last month after not having been told for 4 years. But it did.
Oh, wow.
It was great. So Deirdre is, you know, got me thinking about the whole Celtic storyteller, the bard. And it's a heightened story. I did endless amounts of research into what the life of the Celts was like around the, 100, BC or AD. I don't remember what. There's different letters now, which I can't remember for that time period. But what was it like? How and they come in as just little bits, just a little touch here or there, because you can't. But you have to have the bulk of it.
Yeah. So
I did a lot of reading, a lot of research. What were they wearing? What was their houses like? What was their relationships like? All that kind of thing. And then there was the story itself. And Tom and I were back and forth because he wrote the story and Margot did the Celtic harp. But I came up with a very beginning quatrain for the story, and when I came up with that, he wrote in his own notes, that's what Diane means by the story, because he was trying to figure out where I was going to hang my hat on the character, on the meaning of it. And really it was that it's the beauty of sorrow, because Deirdre means sorrow. They named her sorrow. And my husband's Irish. Melancholy. Oh my God, he loves the melancholy. But it's like beautiful to him.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like this beautiful woman that they couldn't deal well with, and the whole story goes down this slippery slope into the ending. But in the end, I used some of my understanding of mythology to have the beauty of Deirdre now be in the Irish landscape, which is so breathtakingly beautiful. And Lavarcom, the one who caretakes Deirdre, says at the end, I see her sometimes when I'm out walking in the early morning. I mean, imagine a more beautiful time of day. Or in the early morning when this earth is so beautiful, you'd think your heart would break. Because I think that's what her beauty was like. She said, it's she that haunts this land and will not leave. And then it goes, Deirdre, that was the name she was getting. But the whole idea is that she is part of the beauty of Ireland. And they say that Deirdre is the example of this feeling of longing around love, this feeling of incredible longing and beauty. So, and there were things I had to pull in along the way that were in the Toyne. I mean, there's brutality.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And just brutal images. So the language has also got to have these moments of tenderness and beauty and humor.
Yeah.
And then there's the harp music. And I just got to give it up for Tom. I mean, I was just watching him work with melody, whether it was his own or a folkloric tune. For instance, Deirdre is...
Oh, so he mixed the two?
He did mix the two.
Oh, nice.
Deirdre she falls in love with Nisha, hopelessly in love with him. And he is afraid to love her, but then just falls totally in love with her. But of course, the king kills him through deceit, and then keeps Deirdre for himself. And he says to her, the King Conovar says to Deirdre at one point, he says, Deirdre, what do you hate most in the world? Because he's so furious because she's so sad. He can't even have her even when he's got her with him. So he says to her, what do you hate most in the world? And she says, you. And Ogun, who slew my Nisha. He says, then I'll take you to see Ogun. Then you'll have us both together. I mean, that's the level that we're at. So she's in the chariot with him. They're riding out to meet Ogun. There's this beautiful melody called Searching for Lambs.
Mm-hmm.
It's exquisite, it's haunting, it's beautiful. Tom wanted that melody used at that part. So she's riding out in the chariot, and there's this moment where she starts to loosen her hair because she's so desperate, and she's going to be killing herself soon. And Conovar says, maybe I'll keep you a while longer, not let Ogun have you. It's all building. So Tom has this Searching for Lambs melody, and it just starts increasing, and it starts speeding up, and it's speeding up, and it's speeding up as all this is happening until she's letting her fair hair lean, and her skull is crushed to fragments. So it's just this incredibly beautiful melody, but it's just driving like the chariot is driving. Faster they rode through the barren land, right? The barren land.
Yeah.
Because you've got the Fisher King, you've got the king with the wound.
Right.
Through the barren land towards Ogun. And he says to her, soon between Ogun and I, you will be like a sheep eyeing two rams.
Oy.
And she just looks at him, and then she starts to undo her hair, as Nisha had done before, and she just undoes it. And he's saying, oh, maybe I'll keep you a while longer. The music is increasing, but she does it because she's remembering him, and she's honoring him, and then boom, sorry, I probably popped the recorder.
Sure.
So anyway, I mean, we're working with someone like Tom. He's worked in musical theater all these life. And when I'm telling a story and the music is going, I don't have to work. I don't have to do anything.
You just ride.
I just ride.
Yeah.
I just ride. So it's quite a beautiful marrying of melody and moment.
Right.
Not just story, moment. And usually we pull the music in around descriptive passages. Especially if just Margot, my Celtic harper, and I are working, we will stick to descriptive passages. If we're not, we usually talk to Tom. Because he really knows how to keep music there but not intrusive in action. He can really do that.
Yeah. Or complementary to the action.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And it's usually because of simplicity. Like he'll just do a few alternating, you know. I mean, there's something to be said for that.
There is. So before we get on to Gawain, you said something about the amount of research that you did into this. You did research into the costumes, not costumes, the type of clothing that they would wear.
That they wore,
and
the period of time.
Housing and all that kind of stuff.
The role of the bard, the role of the storyteller, because Deirdre's mother is the wife of the bard. You know, I didn't know which direction I was going to. And Lavarcom is a satirist. You know, I didn't know which direction I had to even go to initially with the story, so I wanted to research.
So how much of that came out in the telling? I mean, how did it influence you in the telling? All that research.
Well, you get a feeling for the times and for the brutality of the times. I mean, they would go around with the heads of their enemies tied to their belts.
Right.
Okay, did not appear in the story. You know.
Well, there's a line. One can jump over it.
I mean, I did at one point. I did, and it's just too distracting for the audience. But I did. There's one this one moment. You know, because I was reading a lot about what they did with the heads, and they did this with the heads, and they did with this the heads. It just came out in one line that when Deirdre's mother, before she's born, has to go serve the king, she rises slowly, gathers her heavy skirts, and hurries through the open courtyard where 7 enemy heads mounted on spikes stare past her at nothing. That's it. That's it. But it's that moment of going through the courtyard, and there's just these heads, gray, green in the moonlight. You know?
Love it. And so
brutal.
Yes, and so with Deirdre, you went all in.
All in.
And then with Gawain, you took a
U-turn.
A very big U-turn.
Very big. Well, I tried to do a classic telling of Gawain for years. I tried to do a classic telling, and I just couldn't. The meaning wouldn't arrive.
Right.
It wouldn't arrive. It's a very difficult. You've got all this excitement, and then what you're coming down to at the end is he's humble, and it's a heady ending. How the meaning of it. So I finally said, fine, I'll just modernize it.
The other thing about Gawain is that the earlier...
You say Gawain, and I say Gawain.
So the really early stories, he has no respect for much at all. But as the age of chivalry takes these stories, he becomes the... I don't want to use the word guardian, but he very much looks after women and which is completely different to how he started off. Mm-hmm. So how did you meld all of that into this modern retelling?
I didn't.
You
really.
Didn't? Okay.
I didn't, because I really felt like I wanted... What I ended up wanting was I wanted it to be... There's male-female relationships in it. Mm-hmm. And because of the whole testing of the lady at the end. Right? The lady of the castle has to test Gawain to see if he's going to be honorable. Right. So there was male-female relationships in it, and I didn't want to... I really wanted to work with Gawain as a representation of the modern man, and how the modern man is really trying to fulfill all these things. They're trying to be honorable. They're trying to discover their real self. They're trying to be true to their masculinity in whatever form it comes, and they're working very hard. And so I wanted it to really be representative of this quest in modern time, which precludes the kind of sword fighting and guns and stuff that the Green Knight comes in with. So I wanted the modern man to have to be encounter the same blanking challenge as the Green Knight delivers, but now he's in this new persona. It's like, holy blank, what am I going to do now? But it's what's being asked of me. So I really wanted to keep it in. I didn't really deal with the the developing character of Gowan or anything like that. And of course, the three ladies at the end become three stereotypes of womankind. You've got the lady in the bouffant hairdo, and then you've got the oversexed older woman, and then you have the
Golden
queen.
Girls.
And then you have the queen, who is a queen. So I really wanted him to have to ace, basically, the challenges that each of those three stereotypical women, I don't know if they're called archetypes or more stereotypes. I wanted him to ace them. So I had a lot of fun. Oh my God, I had a lot of fun. Oh my God. And so that's what happened. I was forced to. I worked in it for 2 or 3 years, and I was just like, it's not really happening.
Yeah.
And I went, and I remember I was walking to the pond, and I remember being at the pond and just going, I think I might modernize it. And what about if there wasn't just one lady at the end? It just started coming. One lady at the end, but three ladies at the end. And what if the Green Knight comes in on a bungee cord and, and... And then I was just having fun. Yeah. And I read archaic books like the Oak King and the Holly King. I understood all the mythology that might be buried there about, the Green Knight coming in. He's the Green Man, or he's the Holly King, and blah, 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 blah. And there's elements of that.
Yeah.
Like when he pulls out a staff, the Green Knight pulls out a staff, he holds it aloft and it sprouts holly leaves. It's a dead staff, and it sprouts holly leaves and bright red berries, and then they rain down. They're dead, and then they rain down. So there are elements where you can say, oh, that's the Holly King, or but it's all now in the fabric of the tapestry. That's the other thing. I read books on tapestries and but this is nothing. This is what people do for research. I was out talking with this guy, Bill Carter, who was a life photographer and another photographer, and he was working on something for the Kurds.
Mm-hmm. This recently?
Yes, this was last. It was in January 2019, maybe. And we were staying. Tom and I were staying in his office, and we walked in there. He had 15 books, not on the Kurds, on Kurdish carpets. He said you can tell a lot of about people by their carpets. But he had books, it was filled. But just 15 books on their carpets. It's very hard to find one book on their carpets.
And he had 15?
He had 15.
Wow.
So research, because you don't know. Right. It gets in your bones. It suddenly, you'll get an idea. We put all this stuff in, and then it's all there, fertile ground, and suddenly something starts growing, but it's just a touch. But we can't always mechanically say, I'm going to do this research because I want to use it here, I want to put in this element here.
Oh, yeah. You just got to dive in and see what comes out.
You got to see what comes out.
Yeah, absolutely. Because when I first started doing this, and this isn't about me, I didn't do that much research. But then when I got into the deeper stories, as opposed to Goldilocks and the Three Bears, but even Goldilocks and the Three Bears, it started off as a fox.
Oh.
And Goldilocks was a fox, and then she was a vixen.
Oh.
And then, yes, right?
Wow.
Yeah. And the vixen got misconstrued. At some point along the line, she became a young girl, right? Oh. Or did it? I don't know.
Yeah.
But, it's when the research, you can have a story and you don't quite understand it. It's like, well, what's the time, place of this story? Then where does it come from geographically? What was going on historically?
Yeah.
Was this a war zone for many, many years in the Middle Ages? And it's like, oh, yes, it was. Well, that makes sense why this story is about this, and that's why that story is about that. Stone Soup.
Yeah.
I didn't realize how deep it was anchored in history until I read a book on the age of war up to 1750. And I read this book, and I was like, this is what Stone Soup is all about. This 600-page book. is summed up in Stone Soup.
Yeah.
And it's just remarkable what comes out.
It's in that story somehow.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe it's also there's been some great illustrators of that story.
Right. I mean, I love John Muth's
Oh.
Buddhist version of it with the three monks, right?
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
But the whole idea of coming into the village and everybody's just like, nobody's home. No, you can't. I mean, that was a common
Right, because the
situation.
soldiers would go through these villages on the way to war and they would destroy these towns. All the food supply would be gone because they couldn't carry all the food with them.
Yeah.
And then on their way back out, they would do the same. And
Yeah.
because these wars were usually held in the same places over the same territory, when the soldiers came into town, it's like, no wonder nobody wants to talk to them. There are historical records from the 1500s, 1200s, letters that sextons wrote to other people. Oh, some soldiers came into our town today and we hung them. You know, because they're soldiers.
Yeah.
And these guys, they didn't even want to be soldiers in the first place. They're just farmers that have been told by their lords they've got to go and fight.
Right.
You know, and it's just
Wow.
The depth of that story when you know the history behind it is phenomenal.
Yeah. You tell it, of course, don't you?
Oh yeah.
Oh, I'll have to hear you tell it sometime, Simon. I would love that. Love that.
What do you think is the most rewarding piece that you've done? I mean, to me, I've seen you do little bits here and there, and I love what you do, and you have a real deep passion for what you do. I mean, that comes across just talking to you. But is Deirdre, do you think, your most rewarding piece? Or do you think there's some other work that is your most rewarding piece? Or is it something completely hidden?
Well, I mean, the reward is, you of course, with each story you're entering a world. So always the idea is, did I enter that world? Was I free in that world? Was my audience in tune with me? Did we go many places together? Because really, that's what it is. I'm just to fly with a story. I mean, that's just rewarding, and it can happen with the monkey and shark. I mean, when you're on. So I don't really. I mean, I've gone deeper in different ways with different stories, and they've informed my life.
Oh, talk about that.
Well, I think that, the stories that raise a question about really what is possible in this world, that maybe what we think is possible is not all that's possible, those stories still are like very big questions to me. In fact, I'm thinking about working on a piece coming out of one of those things now, is the question. There's a story that's told in a lot of different cultures.
Mm-hmm.
And it says that at a certain period of time, all of the creatures shared the same language. We could understand each other. And you saw Salmon of Wisdom down in Connecticut. That's the true story about being camping, and then...
I haven't seen that.
Oh, you haven't seen it? Okay.
No.
Salmon of Wisdom is a story that deals with that language of animals motif. But what would it be like if it is true that some of the different cultures say that we could at one point really have this ability to understand each other, and that it was taken away, but could it actually come? Is there a way that we can? So this is a question for me. Is there a way that we can understand it again? Is there a way that we can communicate, that we can hear in a different way, that we can see in a different way, that we can have our human presence in a different way? So I think encountering older relationships with the natural world through story, through myths, through nature myths, I have a lot of questions about let's say, about that, about the role of gratitude in the world.
Oh, yeah.
I really feel like humans, we might have some abilities that the other creatures don't have. And as they talk about the circle, that it is a circle of giving and receiving, when you think of all we receive, and you remember that in the older cultures, gratitude was a very important...
It was huge.
Yeah. But what if that is something that we are keeping the circle going with that?
Well, we've lost it right now. I don't think there is any gratitude. It's just this, I mean, I'm not talking about just the States, but it's like, I see it in England, it's just this consumer society that we've become, and there is no gratitude. It's just take.
And it's all can happen in a moment. It all can happen in a moment. And I've really been thinking a lot about that. The performance that I do in the groves.
Right.
I take audiences, myself and the Celtic Harper, we go into these groves of trees and we sit by the different grove of trees and we tell a story from whatever culture we find, one that really resonates for that tree, Czechoslovakia or the Czech people, the birches, the Japanese, the cherry, and we take a walk in between and then we go to the different trees. Now that is satisfying in a very particular way because people come in and we're caught in the time. I have to be. People are not present.
Mm-hmm.
But through stories and sitting and walking, when we're finally at the last stop and sun is setting around the most beautiful time of the year, right, the solstice, and we finish the last story of the birch tree and the golden birch leaf, the imaginary golden birch leaf, in my hand is then placed on the ground and my hand presses it in. Everyone, we're just sitting there. We're just sitting there and nobody wants to move.
Yeah.
We have reached a state of peace, a state of exchange, because they've been able to see the trees and think about ways that the people thought about them the whole time. So that is rewarding.
Yeah.
And the stories about the Kurdish people are rewarding in a different way.
Right.
Gathering the folktales of the Kurds and getting to tell the story of meeting them, gathering the stories. And as one news review said, in the way the performance is an atonement. It's an atonement for the way that we have the American government in particular, with its arms sales to Turkey over time, has betrayed the Kurds, which is really sad, being in the period of time that we are right now, which is the invasion of Syria by Turkey.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh. So what led you down this path towards collecting the Kurdish stories?
I met Kurdish refugees and I was very moved by their stories. Their true stories. They were from Turkey. And then I found out about the U.S. complicity with Turkey, that it was selling Turkey the planes, that the Apache helicopters, these certain military devices that were allowing the Turks to go into the remote Kurdish areas and threaten them and kill them and do military operations against them in what had once been their only safe haven. So I hadn't really known the U.S. involvement before, and here I am facing these people that I'm feeling so compassionate for, and it just moved me to action. So I first started doing political action. I started trying to raise awareness, and then I thought, oh my gosh, I wonder what, since they are forbidden to read and write Kurdish in Turkey, I wonder what their oral stories are like, their language, and I realized I was standing before, like in Ireland.
Yeah, right. Oh my gosh. Scotland and Wales.
Scotland, these people have been forbidden to speak their languages, and it's the time to gather, because if you don't do it now, it's going. This is the generation. And, people couldn't get in to do it, or if they got in, they would be monitored by the Turkish government, so you had to do it really secretively. So it took me 3 years to build the network of people that, find the people and raise the money to get in there. But it was a project that was not made public at all. Even after I came back, I was very careful to stay off the radio or this or that. because I wanted to go back and gather more stories.
Right.
So, I mean, I was just standing before, and what are you going to do? I mean, you're standing before this situation, you're going to say, well, gee, that's too bad.
Yeah, right. So I remember when the book came out, you were talking about it, and you said that people would open up, they would tell you their stories in Kurdish, and then they would open up their windows and their doors, and they'd talk in Turkish.
Oh.
And then they would close the windows and the doors, and they'd talk to you in Kurdish again.
Well, it was sort of like this. I mean, they're forbidden to speak or write Kurdish, so it was a big consideration for them, and I only wanted the stories recorded in Kurdish. And so yes, there were moments I would be in the village that everybody would be smoking,
Yeah.
I'm hearing the stories, everybody's smoking, and I'm just like dying. So I would go over
because
to...
they're not Marlboro Lights that they're smoking
Holy
either.
crap. Well, I would bring Marlboros with me.
Oh, you would?
Oh, I brought cartons of Marlboros. It was just like, here, let's have some stories. So one village, they said, a cigarette, with my grandmother, a cigarette equals one story. So I handed him a carton of Marlboros. I was like, let's go. But I went over to open the window, and my guide said, you can't do that. There's spies in every village. They're paid for by the Turkish government. They're called the village guard. And if they hear the family speaking Kurdish in here, that's why we're keeping the windows closed. And, there was a lot going on. I mean, I really wasn't allowed. My guide didn't want me to speak Kurdish, even though I knew rudimentary Kurdish, because an American in the villages speaking Kurdish would create
Alarms.
Yeah, because we were just moved from village to village, and what were we doing? We were recording folk tales
On a little device like this?
No, I had a video camera.
Oh, you did?
Oh yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I've got hours and hours and hours and hours.
So is it going to be archived at some point in the
Yeah,
Library of Congress or something?
Yeah, I had a proposal. No, I don't know. I had a proposal in that I wanted to create this actually called a storytelling arc online where Kurdish people could just upload their stories because they can do it now. But I was looking for funding and I didn't get it. But yes, I would like it. I mean, now in the digital age, it could be archived many different places. These are mostly Kurmanji Kurdish stories. That's a certain dialect, but it's a main dialect. They call them dialects, but there's different wordings of things. So I've got a slew of them, and they're beautiful. These tellers, and I fell in love with them. They were so wonderful, and I'd always have to drink copious amounts of tea, and they'd feed me, and I could understand Kurdish. So at one point, I remember they gave me this like bowl of yogurt soup with this strange stuff in it. And I could hear the woman talking to the man. She was joking, I think, but she said, if she doesn't finish it, I'm going to kill her. And she said, kushte. And she said it in Kurdish, but I understood it. And I was like, wow, she has no idea that I know exactly what she's saying.
You didn't let on either, did you?
No. I ate the whole thing, though. So that was how A Fire in My Heart Kurdish Tales came.
Is it going to be another book, do you think? I mean, I haven't read the first one yet. It's on my shelf, but...
No, I mean, it's really a collection of folk tales, and it really talks about the life, like how the stories appear in the life. But imagine, you have to say, okay, what kinds of stories am I hearing? Oh, there's a lot of fox tales. Let's do a section on fox tales. Oh, these are fairy tales. Let's put them in fairy tales. So there's a lot of different... And also there was the life, there was the games that they played, there was the food. It was all, and I spent the beautiful people. They shared everything with me. I have thought about another book, but if I do something, I would maybe try to do, believe it or not, pitch a movie. Based on what I went through, because I've got the performance 1,000 Doorways, which is the journey. And something like that, or pitch. I mean, it's one. You asked me how many ideas I have, Simon. Yeah. I got a lot.
How do you feed yourself artistically?
Feed? You mean food? You mean feed? You mean artistically?
Yeah.
Gee whiz, it doesn't take much. It doesn't. It doesn't. I mean, I could sit alone in my room. It's funny, I got this book recently called The Act of Will.
Okay.
And it's an old book, but it's by this great team, Robert Asiglioli and Piero Ferrucci, who did another book. And if you're into guided imagery, Piero Ferrucci did this amazing thing called What We May Be, where you can It's a whole visualization book. But the act of will, and I thought you can look at like any process, like an artistic process,
Right.
as an act of will, not will as in the way that it's commonly understood today, like forcing yourself to do something you don't want to do. But how do we bring something into being? Okay?
Yeah.
How do we bring something to the
Gotcha.
light?
Yeah.
And I really feel like that's what artists do. That's why tormented artists are fine. I'm a little bit of a tormented artist. You know, if I am not performing, now because I'm used to performing, I used to think I was going to be a visual artist, but now I'm used to performing. So if I'm not performing, I feel this like, you know, something needs to happen. What needs to happen? So
start talking to strangers on the street.
Then I'll start doing my movie. But oh my God, I remember I was rehearsing a piece, you know, going over a story. I remember I was driving the car and I was doing a character, and I realized somebody was looking at me, and I was thinking, oh, note to self: try not to do that particular character when you're driving.
It's only when you roll your eyes and look to the car as they're passing.
I didn't even know. So it comes out of the chaos, right? We get this inarticulate, and that's the thing. That's why people say to you, okay, go and find a story, you say to someone who hasn't been studied, and it touches you. You may not even know why. Right. It's good if you don't know why, because that's the chaos. That's the inarticulate. Something in you went like, eh. Mm-hmm. I hope that translates on audio. But something in you is...
Diane Edgecomb is holding her belly and rubbing it.
I was actually kneading my belly.
Sorry.
But that's close. So some things are coming out of the chaos. I do feed myself artistically by reading. I read a lot of technical books. Dreams.
Okay.
Like Ole Veltfeld has this incredible book on dreams, the dimensions of dreams, like the different ways you can look at dreams, because those are imaginary worlds.
Yeah, they are, yeah.
So I feed myself sometimes on technical books about imaginary worlds, like the dimensions of dreams, like the writings of Mircea Eliade, historian of religions. I spent my initial immersion into storytelling came with reading these incredible historians of religion, Jung, Carl Cariani. I immersed myself in those people who were looking at myths and traditional tales from the point of view of what was their function in the culture as religions or as actual stories that did something to and for the people. Right. And that informed all of my work.
Yeah.
And I'll still go back to them. But the act of will is really just, I really feel like the inspiration and the initial ideas, I've got that. Yeah. That's why there's a million. I think we all do, right? Yeah. There's a million projects, but, you know, the whole idea of like...
It's when your partner says, are you spreading yourself a little thin here? Do you think you should concentrate on one thing and head in that direction?
Oh my God.
Yeah,
it's a you know, multitude of riches, but that's okay. It means we're in touch with the source, right? That is the fountain. That is the source. Yeah. You know, there's a lot of water imagery, really, with it when you think about the story really finding its right course in the telling. And but I can't remember what your question was. But
It's all right.
But I think the thing for me about storytelling is that I hope it's about when we encounter a story, like when we encounter a creature, I really feel like we need to look at it as like a living entity.
Yeah, I think that's very true.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I compare stories to being children.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that there's an element of truth to that, because, you know, there are sometimes you go to a gig and you come with a plan, and that story, that child is hidden away from shyness, but there's another one going, me, pick me. Or, you know, there's the errant child who, you know, you start telling it, and there's some kind of connection with the audience, and it just becomes the most rambunctious child in the room, and you can't reel it back in, and it just has a life of its own. And that's, you know, again, I think sometimes when we have stories like that, that's what, you know, you were talking about Gawain, how that went through a bit of a shift when you hadn't told it for 4 years. And it's kind of like, you know, something comes out of the story that was never there before, and it's like, oh my gosh, that's really cool. Mm-hmm. And if you're good and you write it down, or it was so good that you remember it, then you can keep it, and then they grow.
And
change,
I came back to Gowan with the same problem that I'd had that I left. I mean, I had resolved it, I had gotten to it, but I went, you know what? the story has not yet arrived. So I was back at the same point that I had been.
Is that why you hadn't told it in 4 years?
No. It's an odd story to place, so it doesn't always come up in my repertoire.
Right.
So it just was, I had an opportunity to do it, and I thought, oh my God, it would be so fun to do this again. So, but I think I think we should change our terminology. You know, the terminology is, I need a story to use for such and such.
Yeah.
So the terminology, it's in the, and I'm working on this book.
Which is called, and when will it be available?
It's called The Golden Thread, Finding Meaning in Traditional Tales. And each chapter is going to deal with a different kind of traditional tale. There'll be a section just on fairy tales, a section on general folk tales, a section on pourquoi tales, which I did actually for Nest. There's the bulk of that chapter is done just on pourquoi tales. About these different imaginative landscapes, and really how they each deserve a different approach, because they're different imaginary worlds. They're different, invisible worlds. I remember I was in Poland, and I was sitting at my friend's kitchen, and I was sitting opposite somebody who was working with headhunters. He was an anthropologist. And it was a funeral that we were there for, and late into the night, drinking coffee because we were young and stupid. Or was it vodka?
I was thinking if you're young and stupid, it might be vodka.
Who knows? It was probably vodka.
Maybe both.
Probably both.
One to get the buzz and the other one to keep you awake.
Oh, God. And he said, so what do you do? In his Polish accent, which I will not attempt at this moment. And I said, well, I'm a storyteller. And he said, oh, you still exist. He said, it's good. He said, you take people to the invisible worlds. Yeah. And he didn't say world. He said worlds. They're different. They are different. And we had a long conversation after that. But I was really struck that he didn't say world. That they are different landscapes. I don't know if they're creations of the mind or places that we've found. I think of the Egyptian Book of the Dead or the Tibetan Book of the Dead. Did they find something or did they imagine it? And I say that they found a place or a process, or just like you might dress yourself up for a war or battle, let's say, they found ways to dress up our psyche for this journey. And ways to be able to go through. So I think a lot about that. And that also I find nourishing.
Yeah.
But look at this. Look at the book that arrived in the mail today. Insect Mythology. By
Gene Kinsky and...
Yep. See, it's by scientists. I love it when scientists try to write about mythology.
So you must have read Braiding Sweetgrass.
No.
Oh,
I will have to read that.
Will.
Braiding Sweetgrass is...
It's written... the last name is Chimera. I can't think of her first name. It might be Robin, but I'm not sure.
Sounds beautiful.
And it's written... She is a Native American. And she is also a scientist.
Oh, beautiful.
So she has to reconcile her spiritual side with her scientist side, which looks at the world in very, very different ways. And it is fascinating.
She's walking the many worlds.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, isn't it Braiding Sweetgrass? That's beautiful.
But her last name is Chimera. It's Kimmer. Chimera, E-R.
I will definitely look that. That
Yeah, you
sounds
should.
beautiful.
It's-
Yeah, I love the books that are a combination of, mythology or anthropology and science, because these guys can be crazy.
Mhm.
Don't think that they're just scientists. I mean,
Oh,
science.
no.
They're some of the wackiest people you'll ever meet.
I watched. Yes, I watched a video about the building of the Ark. Gilgamesh's Ark, and it was it was this giant coracle, and I can't remember the guy's name, but he was a loon, absolute crazy dude. This big little Father Christmas guy with his little round glasses on, getting so excited about this. And he was so funny and yet so knowledgeable about what they were doing and how they were building it. And, he was talking about the different kinds of bitumen. And they were building it in India, but the bitumen that they used wasn't Indian tar, it was this Iraqi tar, which is a lot better, but they wouldn't import anything from Iraq, so they had to use this Indian tar, which didn't work as well. It was anyway. He was amazing. He was absolutely incredible, and mad as a hatter, and as brilliant as a star at night.
Yeah. Brilliant as a star at night. My brother is was an entomologist and has a science mind, so I'm often tapping him for different things.
So science runs in the family a little bit.
Yeah, I'm like totally black sheep, totally like, where'd this come from? I mean, I would ask my family, and they say, well, your great aunt read tea leaves. Or your great uncle had a wooden leg.
Oh, so you're that side of the
and
family?
He was that was the other side of the family. He had a wooden leg, and he was very entertaining.
Okay.
So that's the entertainment background in my family.
Reading tea leaves with a wooden leg.
Yeah.
So we went through a big depression, recession. What kept you going through that lean period? Or didn't you notice it?
I didn't really notice it quite that. I mean, when you work in the arts, you have to always be aware that you need to you use the material that people really see a use for. Let's talk about use. With your wildest dreams. And the whole idea you're doing it for anyway is to be able to do your most creative, wildest projects, because you're funding yourself and nobody's going to say no.
Right.
So I've always had a good ability to kind of look and see, well, where might my material find a home? So I think in the recession, that period of time, I think we were seeing also the MCAS, or the testing coming into the schools at that certain period of time. So I know at different points I've seen that really big impact on performances that schools would like. But then you see something like the extended days, will then have a need for someone to come in, and they will be the same people year after year, so that you might be able to switch over there. So I've just continued to morph, and even now I'm morphing. I'm looking at I have this performance language of flowers. And these are all performances that I want to do. I just want to do them, stories and myths about flowers with Celtic harp and song. And
you're really tied to not tied to it, but you're really that lights your eyes up, doesn't it?
Oh my God, it's so great. And then to think that you can find a place for it. So I thought, well, garden clubs.
Yeah.
And to and I've done it. I've performed at other places, but you need to find people for whom this really is a joy to them.
Right, resonates with.
Yes, and so Margot and I toured this 2 garden clubs. We were just at a library last night within the Groves, but I really am looking at the 1,000 Doorways, which is the Kurdish project. I'm really looking at it possibly trying to work in theatrical venues, because the message is so strong about meeting people that you may not know, and really what is it like to be with them and carry their stories that can't be told, and learn yourself as fast as you can how to really be with another culture, another group of people, and be present and witness even to their suffering. And I think that's unfortunately a lot of what those of us, and that's a lot of us, compassionate, sensitive people, we have to learn how to witness and how to be present and still sing, still tell the stories, still make art in these very difficult times.
Yeah.
But I do think I'm going to be looking at some theatrical, which I have already. I mean, I brought it to the Edinburgh Fringe, and it's been at a few theaters. So that's like a morph. But I still am a storyteller. I look at myself as a storyteller, but I think it's important to break that ceiling.
Right.
You know.
Yeah. I would agree with that.
So,
how many gigs do you think you do on average in a year? And I know it's like ebb and flow, but
yeah, I don't really have a sense, you know, and
you just keep working.
I'm sorry, Simon.
That's all right.
I don't look at them as gigs, even though my friend is a drummer and he calls me a gig pig. So he's a good friend who's a drummer, and he says gig pig, you know, because he'll see what I'm doing for work. He'll go, gig pig 1, this is gig pig 2. How's it going over? So I don't know, Simon, how many performances I do. I kind of know that in order to survive, I need a certain amount of money per month.
Right.
And then if I look ahead and I'm not making that much money per month, I try to kind of increase the outreach.
So do you do much cold calling, as it were?
I just can't do that.
You can't?
I can't do it.
So how do you make that extra?
Well, I'd see, you know, I might do a snail mailing. I might say, oh, so-and-so booked me a while ago. I wonder if I might do an email. I sometimes will do a personal email. You know.
So it's reaching out to places that you've been before. Or
it can be.
To in a while.
Yeah, or just do a snail mail. And sometimes I just put my thinking cap on, you know, because it does very much fluctuate.
Yeah, I get that.
And really, a lot of the most interesting projects you want to do are not necessarily going to be bringing in the high money, but that's why you're doing it. So I just, you know, kind of look at the different possible venues, and that's it. You know, you just gotta keep thinking. What you have to also. We're creating it because we want to, but we also have to think, who would this really please? Who would really enjoy this? And at the same time, you want to say, what's my trajectory as an artist, and what needs to come out of this chaos and into the light. And also we're dealing right now with a lot of crises in the natural world. I'm dealing right now with the crises that are facing the Kurdish people, as I have been. When I thought it couldn't get any worse for them, it's continued to get worse. So even it has galvanized me around my performance, 1,000 Doorways. I'm doing things that I've meant to do for a long time. It's just like I'm sending out proposals to theaters because it is a way for people to get to know them, and once you know someone and their story, it's a lot easier. It's not as easy, to dismiss them. So
right, and easier to empathize with them.
Yeah. So you know, it all rises and falls. You know, I do have a business head on my shoulders, but as my friend Pam Christan, which you may know her, she said to me, look, your business and the promotional will take as much time as you give it. It will never be enough.
Yeah, I would say that.
You have to decide when you're stopping. So I think that's more of a difficulty, because it's easier to do the business in a way than to, you know, especially if you're in a rhythm, you've got to establish a creative rhythm. So I have a studio nearby where I will go when I'm rehearsing, to be out of the house, to be out of the...
Really?
Oh my God, it's beautiful, yeah. Friends have taken the 3rd floor of their triple-decker apartment. There is nothing in it. Wooden floor.
Nice.
Windows. And I just go there for 2.5 hours, 4 hours, and just rehearse. Not when I'm rehearsing with Margot. That's easy. When I'm rehearsing with somebody else, I can be anywhere. But here, it's just like if you're working, you just feel a sucking feeling from the kitchen. It's like, wow, how did I end up in the kitchen? I'm in the backyard, whoa.
That's a true statement.
But walking is wonderful too. I know Lauren Nimi did a workshop on, just go walking. It's absolutely true. But when I'm walking, when I'm driving in the car, I have like 15 notepads in my, I just, I'm like going somewhere, it's like, what's this? Oh, this is the book. Oh, this is the, so it's constantly churning.
Yeah. So what would you share with somebody? What do you know now that you wish you knew when you first started? What little snippet of wisdom would you impart to somebody that was starting right now?
Yeah. Well, I would really just really say to someone starting that well, first of all, there's a lot more knowledge about stories and telling them than there really was when I was starting.
You're talking about scientific?
No, I just think in the body of the storytelling movement.
Okay, all right.
I would say to really, study, or ask to mentor with people, or study, just watch them, find what you think is Tommy, my husband, he talks about when he was growing up and he was going to be skating, his father said to him, just took him to a rink, an ice skating rink, dropped him off and said, find the best person there and just follow him.
Oh, wow. That's a good piece of advice.
So I think there's a lot to that. And I would also say just make sure you read like mythology, like these thinkers on old traditional tales, really immerse yourself because, we've lost a lot of connection for these traditional stories from the culture.
Yes.
And since it's not possible to be sitting at the feet of elders and be spending the 12 years or more it might take to immerse yourself in the culture, we can still begin to get an understanding of the depth of stories and how they worked, how they worked as a ritual and just familiarize ourselves, even if some of these books, I open it up, I'm like, I can't read this, and I read it anyway.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then the second time through, I'm like, making a bit more sense.
Yeah.
But it's important to try to climb those mountains and really to try to see how people are thinking about archetypes and dreams and symbols. And personal tales are great, but they're not going to go to the same place that traditional tales or myths are going. They're not going to the same place, and that's why a lot of people are saying, I want to have a workshop on marrying personal stories and traditional tales. It's because they're trying to get that underbelly for the real life.
Yeah. So when I was in Jonesboro last weekend, I was talking to somebody that was an audience member, and they were talking about historically there's been a lot, in the recent history of Jonesboro, the National Storytelling Festival, there's been a lot of personal stories being told. And this year in particular, there seemed to be a lot of folk tales being told. Ironically, Donna Washington was there and was telling personal stories, not folk tales.
It's funny, yeah.
But yeah, I know. But she said, this is something that you're talking about, the underbelly, is that she noticed that the personal stories have a certain vibe to them, but the folk stories, there's a very different vibe, and there's this depth that people kind of, you're talking about these other worlds, right? When you're listening to a personal story, you don't go to another world. You're in the world of that particular particular person up on the stage.
Yeah.
But when you get into the folk and fairy tales, you are taken to a different world.
Yeah. One
of many different worlds.
Yeah.
Depending on the story. And she said there was a palpably there was a very different visceral experience that she was having with these different types of storytelling. And she said it was really cool when she was listening to the folk and fairy tales that there's this place of comfort that they were talking about.
that she was talking about
Yeah.
as an audience member.
As an audience member, yeah.
Interesting. It's very interesting because when I brought these stories to the garden clubs, these places where they keep showing up, they could say, I had no idea what I was coming for, no idea. But they kept saying, I felt so peaceful.
Mm-hmm.
And yesterday when I took it to the library, they were just like, it just was, you're taking them to a different world. And very important thing that the storyteller makes people feel safe there.
Mm-hmm.
So even with the story of Deirdre, okay, we're going to some very difficult places. The idea is that on the journey, they need to know that I, as a teller, am going to be taking care of them. The Celtic storytellers, as you know, they needed to be able to tell a story that would they had to be able to do three things: make people laugh, bring them to tears, okay, because that's an important door to open, right?
Yeah.
Very important door. And also, they had to be able to make them fall asleep. And I wrestled with that for years, like I wrestled with the ending of Gawain. I mean, like, what do they mean? I'm like, oh, they mean open the door to dreams. They just didn't put it that way. And then somebody told me an anecdote they said that they were going into classrooms and telling stories to kids. I think it was like second grade. And every time they went into the second grade classroom, this one little boy, she'd start telling the stories and he fell asleep. She's like, what is the matter with me? It's like my material, I'm just not entertaining, I'm not expressive enough. Every single time she went in, the kid just fell asleep. And the teacher caught her in the hallways and said, I just have to tell you something. The little boy who falls asleep in your classroom, every time you tell a story, he said his home life is so bad. It's so chaotic. There's violence. He's afraid to sleep at night.
Oh my God.
But when you start telling a story, he feels safe and he falls asleep. And I thought, that's what they mean.
Yeah.
That's what they mean. So I'm never upset when my audience falls asleep because really, they've gone beyond the language, the threshold of dream, and it's just, and they're in whatever world they need to be in for that moment, and that's, I think, what they mean when they say that the storyteller has, no matter what land you go to, there is a safety in their presence.
Yeah, I think that's true. And that's that comfort feeling.
Yeah, I think so. Because I was thinking, well, these stories are, one of them, I don't know why they think it's peaceful, but they were saying that, but they just felt like because of the way they were able to sit and they were able to go into these invisible worlds was a doorway that they hadn't really been able to open a lot. And it was feeling like that to them.
Wow. That must be... So for the kids who can't tell their stories, you were giving them a safe place to open up part of themselves that hadn't been opened in a long time, I would imagine.
People would say to me, I haven't been asked to tell a story in 20 years.
Oh my gosh.
That was what I heard the most. I haven't been asked to tell a story in 20 years. So.
Were you on NPR?
I was on NPR. I was on several times. Of course, it was the same episode.
So what was that experience like?
Well, with NPR, they have different programs.
National Public Radio, for those people.
Yeah, National Public Radio. So it was an episode called Living on Earth. And it was recorded here, so it wasn't really that unusual. We have the WGBH studios, and it was material that I already had. It was seasonal material, so it was nice. It wasn't really high pressure or anything like that. I think with most of these things, if your material ends up in the right desk at the right time and they're looking for it, it's a pretty natural and logical story, and spoken word and the radio are very, very compatible.
They are very compatible.
Simpatico.
So they work well together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not much to say on it.
Yeah, and I
highly recommend it.
But I also saw that maybe there's another Diane Edgecomb out there, but the Internet Movie Database mentioned your name on Beowulf
Oh, yes. Oh,
2006.
yes. Oh, yes. That
So
was me.
That was you?
That was me. I got to play Grendel.
Grendel.
I got to play, well, fitting with my early, Akala Goblin, and now I play. Well, it was a film done by Tom Kingdon, who's a director and professor of film at Emerson, and he wanted to do Beowulf, but he wanted to do it developing it through experimental theater techniques, which are very physical. And he had a wonderful videographer. So I got to play Grendel. I played her like a crazy bag lady, and it was super. It was super fun. So I have been in film. That was me.
That was you, 2006, ladies and gentlemen. Beowulf.
Yep.
I'm gonna have to find that now somewhere and watch it. And put a link up on the website for people to go and see that. That'd be fun. So, I'm going to ask you one more question.
Okay, here we come.
What is your favourite breakfast?
Oh.
Where would you like to eat it? And with whom?
Oh, I like what we're doing right now.
This would be brunch.
This would be brunch. That's right. It's a little late. Okay. Well, what can I say? I'm an omnivore. I do love eggs Benedict.
Okay.
I really do like that, and I would love to be by the lake, and I would love
Any
to.
particular lake? The one down the road from here?
No, that's a pond. That's
Okay.
too small to be a lake. We used to spend our summers up in the Maine and by the lake, and I'd like just to have my breakfast knowing that I would just be able to spend the day just writing or reading or journaling or drawing watercolors and just be eating my eggs Benedict and just knowing that the rest of the day and this moment in the day there's like nothing else to do except just dabble and write and when my husband and I go on vacation, it's like we're loading up the car. It's like he's got to bring it's like vacation. He's bringing his keyboard, we're bringing our computers, we're going to be writing, we're going to be singing, so my favorite vacation and my favorite breakfast would be knowing I'm going to have a day in creative work.
That's cool. I like that. Well, Diane, thank you so much for doing this.
Oh, thank you,
really
Simon. It's great to see you and great to be with you.
It's nice to be with you also. Thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome.
The end.
And they all lived happily ever after.
Thanks to Diane, who was a lovely host and a fabulous person to sit and chat with. Diane's work, including her book A Fire in My Heart and her 4 CDs, can be found on her website, livingmyth.com. There you'll also find videos of her story and craft and a link, which will go on the show notes, to the interview with Eric Wolf back in 2011 from his show, The Art of Storytelling. Thanks for taking the time out of your day to be here right now with me. I hope you, my listeners, enjoyed the conversation as much as I did and learned much about the art and the ways to look at the art and craft of storytelling. Creating this show is very much a labour of love. To help keep this podcast going and to help create more, please consider making a donation. You can do this through my Patreon page, www.patreon.com/Simon Brooks. A couple of dollars a month, a single donation if you like a particular episode, will all help me reach further and create more of these conversations. It's not just the cost of the hosting of the podcast, but the travel to meet these folks, the time to record, edit and produce the show, but you know that. I would love it, absolutely love it, if you were able to leave a review on Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, or wherever else you found this episode. It helps not just me, but it helps others find this podcast and know what they're getting into. Thanks again for being here with me and my guests each month. Until next time, prosper and be happy. Cheers.